Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Indianaut Podcast, where we interview some of India's next best analytical and creative minds who are not only revolutionizing their own field but at the same time transforming India's ecosystem one step at a time. Our guest for the day's story starts out quite similar to that of the majority of Indians. They decided to become an engineer at the age of 15 and upon graduating from college started work at a MNC with the hope of later studying an MBA and joining another MNC. However, where our speaker's story diverges from the traditional path is perhaps one of the most interesting stories I've ever heard. Today we have with us Mr. Vikramaditya Singh, the co-founder of Muncher Media. Let's just jump right into the conversation. Hi Vikram, how are you?
Hey Gautam, congratulations on the show.
Thank you.
There's a slight correction there. I did not decide to be an engineer at age 15. I decided to be an engineer the day I went to engineering college, not before that. I had no idea I was going to be an engineer or I wanted to be an engineer.
So was this your decision or your parents?
Both.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
More my parents.
Let's just go with mutual.
Let's go with mutual. More my parents, but I saw the benefits. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm glad I did it at the end of the day.
So how was college?
College was interesting. I did electronics and communication because I felt in the 11th and 12th in physics, that's the sort of interest area I developed.
Right.
But obviously, as most things do, turned out to be completely the opposite of what I expected. It was pretty tough. I went to Chennai. I went to SRM University. So that was sort of a social, cultural shock for me, having been born and raised in Delhi. But it was pretty interesting. The one thing that I keep telling other people is that regardless of whether you're in the field or not professionally, the one thing that engineering teaches you is a certain mindset, which is very tough to sort of get if you do arts or something else, right? So I think that's one thing I'm very grateful of, like this analytical mindset approach to things, which helps with everyday life.
Guys, just a quick reminder, I'm from an arts background and whatever he's just said right now does not make sense at all. Okay? So you can completely ignore this. We'll probably delete it. So
Right.
That's fantastic. I mean, you're someone who actually has valuable insights from doing an engineering degree. Majority of my friends just don't. They're like, yeah, my engineering degree was a complete blur. And
I was the same opinion till about 2-3 years back.
Right.
It's only someone else when they said it to me, and then I kind of absorbed it over some period of time when I truly realized it. So I'm assuming that's what your friends are going through as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So that's fantastic. So right out of college, you joined Airtel, right? And
Yeah.
you started working at Airtel.
Yes.
And so was working with an MNC your prime drive towards entrepreneurship, that you realized that you want to do more meaningful work, or was it something that you wanted to pursue ever since you were a kid?
No, definitely not ever since I was a kid. I actually went to engineering college not knowing too much about startups. I completed my engineering without still not knowing too much about the startup scene, because in Bangalore at the time is when it was kind of like picking up. I worked at Airtel because I thought naturally after what I'd studied, that'd be the best application of what I'd studied. And that, like you said, was a big driver in terms of me first realizing that this traditional corporate MNC type of a job role is not suited for me. And then once I started exploring the options and then talking to people is when I realized that, startups are a thing and this ecosystem is actually valuable, and it interested me. And that's when I dove in.
Fantastic. So ever since then, you've been associated with somewhere close to 4 entrepreneurial ventures, right? Before kickstarting Muncher Media back in 2014. So tell us about your journey, like right after Airtel, from being a standard textbook engineer who joined a MNC, like I previously mentioned, to now being an Indianaut.
So I had another job after Airtel, which was more along the lines of what I'd studied. It was electronical equipment manufacturing, a firm there. And after that, so I joined a startup. Where another friend was working. It was basically a drag and drop website editor tool like Wix or Weebly, but Indian based. So I was there for about a year and a half, and then we were doing a lot of interesting stuff there. And I left that to start my first venture, which was back in 2014, and that one was called Parkify. So think like a search and booking engine for parking spots.
Oh, okay.
And that's a space that's really hot right now. Park Plus, another startup, just raised a lot of money.
I recently heard.
So I used the excuse of we were too soon a lot when it comes to Parkify. And post Parkify is when I worked with another startup. It was a creative agency. It's still running, Lazy at Design. Still friends with those guys. And post Lazy at Design is when Vidar, who's the other co-founder for Muncher, both of us got together. We've been school friends, and podcast was a common interest area. And we thought that that's an interesting space to work towards in India. So that's when we started Muncher in late 2017.
So tell us about Muncher Media.
So Muncher Media is a digital content media house, right? And the idea is to create digital content or help and enable other people to create digital content. And the approach was audio first, and then within audio was podcasts specifically. So that's how we started. Vidar and I started by starting our own podcast. We thought that just trial and error is the best way to learn. And that podcast was Film Feud, and it's still alive today. It's one of our better performing podcasts. Vidar and I hosted ourselves. We have a lot of fun doing it. So we started Film Feud to sort of understand the nuances that come along with podcasting, and everything about it, marketing it, distributing it, just recording it, all the editing, all of that stuff. So that's when Muncher Media came into existence, and the idea was always to just help the podcast ecosystem in India grow by one way or another. And how we do that is work with collaborators, work with creators like yourself, help them start their own show, have other people start shows who want to be a part of the Muncher Media family as well. And pretty soon on, we realized that video is another thing that we're interested in. So that's when we ended up foraying into YouTube as well. And I think we have 2 YouTube channels right now. And one's movies focused and one's focused on Muncher Podcast. So converting podcasts to a video-friendly format.
Right. And one of your most successful podcasts, right? The Pursuit of Wellness, that forayed into the video space recently, right? With your season 2. And so tell us about that. Tell us how the transition from audio to video, like how was the entire experience? And more than that, do you think that Indian population's appetite for a video-based content platform is more as compared to that of an audio podcast?
So the Pursuit of Wellness was the first video podcast that we had. We started that with the season 2 of that show. To the point about video versus audio from an Indian ecosystem, I would actually say no. People in India are very used to audio content, but they're not used to podcasts. Podcast is a new medium for them. It's a new format. They're pretty alien to it. But audio content consumption has always been at an all-time high. Radios and stories and all of that stuff, right? So I'm pretty confident that in another year or so, podcasts as the go-to audio format will pick up, because just the geo effect. All these tier 2, tier 3 people have internet access now, have cheap smartphone access as well. So they're willing to consume content, digital content. So radio cannot serve the purpose there. So I'm pretty sure podcasts will end up sort of filling in that gap. Video has always been Indians love video, and with the advent of Bollywood and TV shows and the Ekta Kapoors and stuff like that, we know that video is big. And with YouTube as well, you can see for the past 3-4 years that YouTube trends in India are very geared towards high growth, high volume, and a lot of Indian creators creating content in regional languages or Hindi are actually doing much better than general perceived YouTube content in general. So I think there's good scope for both. There's a space for both, and there's an appetite for both.
Right. You're absolutely correct over here. But at the same time, when it comes to long form content, right, which makes up a majority of the podcast, right, more than the 20-minute mark, that is, do you feel like an audio only content is something that Indians are slowly adapting to, or is it something that they're more comfortable seeing in a video format? For example, we see interviews which happen on news channels. Those are something people are quite familiar with, quite used to, right, as compared to just hearing an audio about the interview. Is that something the Indian markets are slowly adapting to? I mean, will we see a similar trend that has occurred in the US, where long form interview experiences only in audio are quite popular?
I would want to say yes. Unfortunately, the sample size is too small to sort of pick apart and find indicators to go either direction of the argument, right? But what's always the case, especially with India, is that whenever something new is introduced, especially in regards to content, it's always the bite-sized stuff that sort of gets people in. And then
you mean TikTok, right?
even YouTube, you'd see that the 5 to 7 minute videos will be performing much better than the 20 or 20 plus minute videos. And it's the same case with podcasts right now, just because it's so new. So the idea is to get more people in, have them mature as audiences, and as they mature, they're more and more willing to consume longer pieces of content. So given that trend, regardless of what's happening in the States, because it's almost always very different in terms of what unfolds in India. So given that trend in general content consumption, I would safely say that, yeah, in a year or 2 years, long form interview content over audio would work as well.
So while we're on the topic of podcasts, I remember following CES 2020 closely, and there was this panel from Spotify where the VP at Spotify for global ad sales, Lee Brown, came and he said, and I quote, "There's no medium like podcasts," right? So, what are your views on that? I mean, I understand you have mentioned your views on podcast and everything, but I just want to understand from an advertising perspective, is podcasting the right place to enter in this stage as compared to videos or as compared to your traditional mass marketing features?
Advertising within podcasts has a place, of course, but I actually think what he truly meant was from the point of view of content consumption. There is nothing like podcasts out there, and this is not like a toot my own horn situation. I actually listen to a lot of podcasts daily, right?
We all do.
And I could see a sort of distribution between how much time I spend listening to music versus how much time I listen to podcasts. And it was 80-20 when I began listening to podcasts, and now I barely listen to music. I force myself to listen to music because I haven't. And that's purely because of how the medium is and how you react to that medium. So it's very immersive, it's in your ear, and especially when you like a podcast, you end up building this subconscious relationship with the host. So whatever the host says, you either have a divisive opinion on it or you like it. So the way to consume that sort of content is, I feel like, pretty very immersive, and you absorb way more than watching a video or watching TV or movie or something like that. And also the ease of access to consuming that content. So you can do it while you drive, you can do it while you're on a run. So all of that stuff just coming together, I think the dissemination of information via podcasts has the highest absorption capabilities whenever someone is listening to it, as opposed to if I see that same information over a video or I read it in a written word piece. So I completely agree with the sentiment. In terms of advertising as well, India, there's not enough data, but there have been so many studies done by like a Nielsen or something like that in the States where they've pinpointed where advertisers' ROI on advertising on a podcast versus advertising on a video is so much higher because A, the cost is lower, but also because of the point about building a relationship with the host, a listener building a relationship with the host.
Right.
Whenever they do a host-read campaign, I would more likely click on that product as opposed to seeing a generic ad on TV. So the advertising efficacy is so much higher in podcasts as opposed to video or written word that it's just a no-brainer for advertisers to come on. So just as a small example, if I have a podcast that focuses on running, and that podcast only has 5,000 active listeners, but those 5,000 guys are active runners. So for a Nike to come and advertise over there to those 5,000 people who directly translate to its TG, as opposed to doing a Facebook campaign, for example, where they're just casting a wide net and hoping to get 5,000 from a million they reach or 100,000 they reach, they're just spending so much lesser here, and the audience is directly translating to their target audience and sales, etc. So that's why advertising is huge in the States, right? You mentioned Spotify. Spotify had a big year last year. They did about 3 acquisitions in the podcasting space, and they just came out with the news a week or so ago about acquiring one of my favorite podcast networks. It's called The Ringer. It's purely focused on sports and pop culture. And within sports, it's very heavy into basketball. That's my favorite sport. So those guys just bought The Ringer as well. Ringer is like touted as the new wave ESPN of the modern world, essentially, because they have a publication, they have like 30 podcasts and stuff like that. So Spotify is going big, rightly so. And I like the direction they're taking because they have to surpass the incumbents who sadly are asleep, I feel like. So overall podcasting, I agree with the sentiment. There's no medium like it for advertisers as well as consumers.
Right. Makes sense. While we are on the topic of Spotify, Spotify last year acquired Gimlet Media, right?
Yeah.
So I follow a couple of podcasts which Gimlet Media produces, and I think that was a brilliant move, right?
Yeah.
If you look at it from a perspective, they're like shoring up content, like original content, which can in the future become exclusive to them, right?
Right.
So do you see a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening in this space in the future? Do you see that affecting the Indian ecospace as well? Because in India, there aren't many original content creators. I mean, Savan has a couple of exclusive shows, but do you see that trend happening in India as well? Because Spotify and Amazon Music and Savan or Ghana, they also have podcast facilities now, and more than that, they also do want original content, right? So do you
Right.
think that trend do you see that trend falling in India as well, and do you see that trend expanding even more in the US?
Expanding more in the US, yeah, definitely, because it all just kickstarted with Luminary last year. So Luminary became the first sort of power move to move away from how generally podcasts have functioned, right? It put everything behind a paywall, and it tried to sort of earn money via that route as opposed to advertising, traditional revenue generation in podcasts. So because of that, all of these sort of dominoes started falling, and the Spotify's did the Gimlets, and now the Ringers, and also tech acquisitions like Anchor as well. So a lot of people host their podcasts on Anchor. So
Right.
all of that gets absorbed. You do as well, right? So you that gets absorbed into Spotify's inventory too. As about India, I don't think so right now, because there are no Gimlets and Ringers and all in India right now, because the ecosystem is not mature, it's not developed, everything is so nascent. Even a Muncher Media, right? We have a few podcasts. There's IVM Podcast in Bombay. They have a lot of shows.
Right. IVM
But
does.
that's the only sort of example that could do that.
Makes sense.
So as to that trend unfolding in India right now, definitely not. But in the future, maybe. It's just India's like in a very Wild West sort of situation when it comes to podcasting. So it's taking a very different approach. So it's very tough to say what actually will happen. A lot of the Savans and the Ghanas of the world are in the market for acquiring shows as opposed to acquiring media houses, right? So if that direction matures, then it takes it into a completely different direction as opposed to how it's panned out in the States. So like I said, because India is so unique, and podcasting is now sort of hitting its stride in India, after everything that's happened in the States, it might not be a like for like sort of unfolding or patterns that pop up in India.
Right. Makes sense. So you spoke about basketball, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to circle around that. Okay. What's up with the Bucks?
Bucks have
Giannis is really killing it.
They have a true specimen, a human specimen on their team, and
okay. Quick question: Can you pronounce his surname properly?
Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Can you repeat that?
Antetokounmpo.
Okay, now you can continue.
Yeah.
You've just proved.
I've proved that I watch basketball.
Yeah, you proved your legitimacy.
Yeah. So he, I love that we're talking about this, by the way.
Right.
So he, God-given athletic abilities, plus drive and determination. That guy is like the first on the court, last to leave. And you can see that in terms of his leveling up season over season. So like 4 seasons ago, Giannis was, this kid can be good.
Right.
And now it's like, how do we stop that guy?
Right.
And because basketball has matured, especially in the NBA, it's matured to a sport which is much more faster than it used to be. A lot more 3-point shots and stuff like that. So the people like Giannis and all the tall guys were sort of getting pushed to the side. But then people like Giannis are also so driven that they've developed their own 3-point shot. So
but this trend, the tall guys getting pushed out of the picture, this started with Steph Curry, right? I mean, he would be one of the originators.
He is the original, yeah.
The original.
No, there's no other argument there.
Right.
I mean, there were precursors. There was a Steve Nash Phoenix Suns scene in the first decade of 2000s, which kind of did that, but they didn't take as many 3-pointers. Right. But Steph Curry, and because of that, the James Harden and the Damian Lillard, now everyone takes a 3. To the extent that the NBA All-Star game, it has a 3-point shootout, right? So the 3-point shootout this year is going to have a special shot, which is going to be 6 feet away from the 3-point line, like a deep 3. So you get like 2 points for that.
Oh, that's amazing.
But that just shows like where basketball is going to, right?
Where
and
it's progressing.
There are like hear a lot of rumors about, let's make a 4-point shot, like let's go as deep as possible. That's going to ruin it.
Right.
That's going to be pushing it too far. But like the players like Giannis who know they have to adapt are adapting. There are a lot of big men, 7-foot guys who are taking 3-pointers now as well.
Right.
So it's a fun time to be a basketball fan.
But my God, LeBron James does not take as many 3-pointers as he should.
Because he can't. He's kind of old, but because he's such a genius player, he's tweaked his game. He knows Yeah, he knows what his team needs. He has a massive support pillar in terms of Anthony Davis on that team.
Right.
So he knows now he's supposed to be the assist guy.
You look at last year's Lakers and you look at this
You
year's
see the
Lakers.
difference,
I mean,
right?
you see
Just
a
one
major
player,
difference.
one player, and that's pretty much it.
Right. Plus, there's no more Lonzo Ball, so that helps.
That helps, and then that's surprising, right? You add one player and you let go of like 4, and
They
your
let
team
go of 3, right?
They let go of 4 and like a couple of picks.
Right.
They literally sold like
Right.
whatever they could.
Right,
They
right,
sold
right.
for Anthony Davis, and you see the difference. And
Right.
James being James, because he's a legend, he knows what he needs to do with the team. So now he's an assist guy,
Right.
and he'll take the assist title.
Right. So whenever I'm watching NBA videos on YouTube, I see so much hate against James's play, right? Because whenever James is sitting out of the court, like he's sitting on the bench,
Yeah.
you see like a massive uptick in points against Lakers, right? So people just outright blame it on James, that right, because the way he plays his game and the way the team trains, it just centers around him, which is like one criticism we hear a lot about LeBron James, but I don't think it's true. But it's just
Look,
something
the guy
we hear.
made 8 finals in 8
Right,
years.
he
So
did.
no matter what you say, it
Right.
works. Whatever he does
Makes
works.
sense.
I'm not the biggest LeBron James fan. I don't think he's the best player in the NBA right now. But you can't credit where it's due, right?
Right, makes sense. And another guy who was expected to make big moves this year, but sadly due to an injury he wasn't able to. But now he's back, Zion Williamson, right?
Yeah.
So the new Pelicans team just looks like the last year's NBA team. Plus they added Zion Williamson, right?
They added Zion and all those guys who came from the Lakers.
Right.
They're kind of more settled in, and they added
Definitely.
a few other pieces. So like the problem with the Pelicans team last year was there were no veterans in the squad.
Yeah, they weren't.
So the guy who had the most experience had like 7
Makes
seasons
sense.
in.
Makes sense.
And that within the locker room is a big sort of drawback. So
Right,
now they've
right.
added a few veterans like JJ Redick and
Right,
stuff like
right,
that.
right.
So that combined with Zion finally coming back, you can see the difference in the team now.
Right.
And Zion's a beast, dude. So
I
it's just
was
gonna be so much
really
fun.
excited about Bucks versus Pelicans. I think it happened a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
I loved that game.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so fun to watch. I mean,
Yeah.
sadly the Pelicans lost. But
Because Giannis and the Bucks are on a historic run right now.
Right.
They've gone like 30 games unbeaten or something like that.
yeah, I mean, I think the number I last remember is 41-7, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's even more than 41.
They have the best record in the
Right,
NBA.
best.
So that goes to show how good that team is. So
Right.
obviously a newly integrated Zion can't do
Right,
much damage,
right.
but you saw flashes in that game.
Right,
There's a lot to come.
I
Yeah.
did. So I remember Zion blocking one shot from Giannis.
I went like the stands. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
That was just really crazy.
I'm excited, man. I'm excited.
I'm
about
actually
sports.
excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this season of NBA, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I hope Lakers win. Right.
Really?
Right. So I'm just a LeBron James fan. So I have been a Cleveland Cavaliers fan. I've been
You're a traveling LeBron
yeah,
fan.
I'm a traveling
You're a
LeBron
Miami
fan.
Heat fan. when
Yeah,
you're there.
I was that.
A friendly wager. I think the Clippers will beat the Lakers if they do get on a head-to-head.
Right.
I think the Clippers are coming out on top in that conference. So either
Let's
they
see.
go through Lakers or Lakers lose somewhere else. I
Right.
feel like it's Clippers' thing.
So Lakers is doing the best right now, right? 37-11 last I remember.
Yeah, but both times they faced the Clippers, they got
Right,
whooped. So
right.
and the Clippers are, because Kawhi Leonard and Paul George,
Yeah.
they do a lot of load management and
Yeah.
stuff. They're not going all like guns blazing. And come playoff time, Kawhi Leonard becomes a different player, man. So it'll be tough.
I'll take that bet.
Done.
Okay, so let's just jump back to Muncher Media.
Oh,
I
is
think-
that what
I-
we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, like you had previously mentioned, Muncher also specializes in producing and providing full services towards enabling aspiring podcasters, right? My question for you is that what advice do you have for aspiring podcasters, right? I
Right.
mean, because this space is not easy to get into because there aren't that many Indian examples, right? And so keeping that in mind, what kind of advice do you have for other folks?
So my advice, I've actually been asked this question multiple times and it's been unchanged. And the primary advice is just start. There's a lot of, you'll find a lot of procrastination, overthinking, hesitation and stuff like that. Quality achhi hogi ya nahi? Will it be up to par in terms of what I have in mind and stuff? So to that, I say just start. If you have something in mind and if you want to talk about something, just start, right? There's no other way to learn. The other thing about Indian podcasts, there are actually quite a few now, right? When we started, I think there were less than 70, 50 Indian podcasts historically. And now I can say that number's over 200 active podcasts at least. So that just goes to show that people out there are willing to learn and listen. there are a lot of resources online. There are a lot of people you can talk to. I find the and the podcasting community overall in India to be very approachable. People want to help out and stuff like that. So there's no roadblock in terms of understanding what to do, how to do it, and stuff like that. And there are enough people. If not, there will be enough people like us. So what we try to do is, if you don't want any help and you just want to use the studio, come use the studio. If you want us to help you, we'll help you. If you want it to be a Muncher show, we'll do anything we can do to help you start your own podcast, essentially. Right. So there are enough people out there. There are enough sounding boards out there, and I would say just don't hesitate. Even if you feel like it won't be good, it won't be bad. It won't be good. Firstly, it's very tough to just start on a very high level as a step one. You gradually build to that, and you don't get to that point unless you start. So if you have anything in mind, just start your podcast.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. While I'm picking your brain for advice, what advice do you have for aspiring entrepreneurs or aspiring Indianauts, as I say it, right? Like the entire brand of the show depends on that word, right? Why I'm asking you this, and I just want to remind everyone, is because you worked in 4 entrepreneurial organizations, and Muncher has been operating since 2017, and it's been going on a good pace. So I just want to pick your brain over there. What advice do you have for other entrepreneurs, other pioneers who want to enter this industry, aspiring pioneers who want to enter this industry?
That's obviously a much deeper answer than starting your own podcast, but I can only give that answer basis of my experience, and my experience comes from failings, obviously. So the first startup that I started, the parking one, we shut it down because it didn't work out, and the website one before that, that eventually got shut down. I'd left much before that, but the issue there is to not hubris comes into play a lot. I see a lot of people quitting their job and that being the catalyst for them to start their own venture. That should never be the case.
Right.
You should always have a very stable sort of professional forecast or outlook in mind. I made that mistake myself. I quit before I had another job in hand. I've done that multiple times.
Right.
And I've now realized, being 31 years old, that that's the worst thing you can do. Because again, the hubris, the excitement, yaar chal shuru karte hain yaar, kuch karte hain yaar. And
I'm sorry, 31 and single ladies.
Not single.
Okay.
Just before my lady comes on the stage, yeah, not single.
Right.
So be careful. Talk to a lot of people. A lot of people don't do that. They don't try to actively find mentors or sounding boards. I think that's a bad idea. And it's not the toughest thing to do. To find, you can find a mentor who does completely the opposite thing that you want to do, but it's just what you pick from their advice. So talk to as many people as you can, sort of understand what they're trying to say. A lot of people also take criticism and feedback negatively or harshly. They all think it's like an ego attack. It's never an ego attack. Whatever you're being advised is coming from a place of experience. So it's up to you to sort of absorb that advice, pick what works for you, discard what doesn't work for you. But I feel like talking to a lot more people will help synthesize whatever idea you have in your mind and whatever efforts you want to make to get that idea to fruition. So don't do that. Don't take that step in a hurry. Just don't rush through it. Your entire life's ahead of you. So if you spend one more month trying to figure that out and then do it, it could save years in the future.
Right. And when you mention the word experience, the first thing that comes to my mind is that based on my interactions with other entrepreneurs, there's always been one thing in common. Like, you face a lot of failures, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of missteps you take, or a lot of decisions which do not go the way you want them to go. But at the same time, I mean, I've seen people rebound from those decisions, just consider them beta and not your version 1, and then move on, right?
Position it how you want, but
exactly.
Failings are what actually teach you the most than success.
Precisely.
Yeah. So the more you fail, the better, actually. So
absolutely,
to not get bogged down by a failure is the right first step to a secure future within the startup ecosystem. It's very rare. It does happen where a group of IITians get together and whatever they create just blows up. But for us normal people, non-IITians, it's not the case always, right? So not rushing that first step. but not also being afraid of failing is, I think, the right mindset to approach it with.
Makes sense. You know, you mentioned the word IIT and it just makes me realize, and because I was reading about this the other day, that between the years 2015 to 2018, majority of the Indian startups were just completely dependent on the words IIT and IIM.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting that you mentioned that. So I was of the same mindset, especially during my first startup, so Parkify, and I remember going for one of these fundraising meetings to a VC. I don't want to name the VC or the person I spoke to.
Right, makes sense.
And the first thing that I asked him, because at that time I was at the height of my frustration कि यार मैं भी तो engineer हूँ यार I'm pretty sure I know more than that chemical engineer from IIT, right? But what his answer, which made complete sense, was he's like, listen, we're VCs and we're talking to 100 of you every week. Now, if you all come to us with a business plan, a financial forecast, a fund allocation, and that's standard VC template. If 100 of you are coming with me with that, then I'm going to choose the one IIT guy over you, because VCs tend to place a proxy of success on these degrees and stuff, because that's the only way they can differentiate, right?
Right.
So the other thing about what you said was the idea is actually not the be all end all. It's the team. It's the people you're working with. It's how level-headed you seem in that 5-minute meeting with the VC, that first meeting with the VC. And okay, you're from IIT, that's another plus point added to your thing. Oh, you have an IIM advisor, that's another plus point added to your thing. And then if you the second meeting you have is an engineer from SRM and eco-honors graduate from DU somewhere,
right,
and find that idea is much more interesting, but all the others are knocks in terms of comparing it to the IIT team, then obviously I'm giving the money, I want to be safe, so I'm going to give it to the IIT guys, which makes sense.
But like letting go of the word IIT, let's just focus on the word team, right? So I've been lucky enough to meet almost each and every member of Muncher Media's family so far, and I understand you have a great working environment and great dynamics and whatnot. But let's just elaborate. How about you elaborate on that a little bit? So I've seen you guys are practically chilling.
It seems like it.
Right.
So. Especially regarding the team here,
let me just expand on that a bit further. Like when I say the word chilling, what I'm trying to say is that I see a very open culture, right?
Yeah.
There's no barrier between the leadership and the other members of the team. There's no, like, that kind of a culture really helps your startup, right?
I feel
there's so much openness, right?
I feel so. I think the whole not to bash on the cubicle system and all of that has its own merits in a different setup. So if I was running TCS, then I would prefer to have a cubicle system. Of course, it makes sense. But with us, especially because we're creating content, it's more creative than anything else. Collaboration is key. So the team right now at Muncher is super small. It's me and Vidur, we're the co-founders. We have an audio video team in place. And we have a lot of collaborators that we work with who are not full-time. They come in whenever it's, they want to shoot a video or they want to record their podcast or stuff like that. But the idea being that the core team needs to always be working together, because I need to be talking to him, he needs to be talking to her, she needs to be talking to him. And with that, I always feel like an open system is the best way to do it.
Right.
Because if there are barriers, then they end up being barriers in creativity as well. And whenever that happens, then content suffers. When content suffers, Muncher suffers. So it doesn't make sense that way.
So content is key for Muncher, right?
Content is king for Muncher.
Content is James for Muncher.
No, James.
Okay, so what kind of expansion plans does Muncher have for the year 2020? Like, what's your vision 2020?
Vision is just more content, man. We just want to make more podcasts. We want to make a lot more shows in regional languages, in Hindi. A lot of our initial efforts were focused on English, just because the natural interest area fell within that. But we have now a lot of collaborators, a lot of people in the team who can help us kickstart the vernacular side of things. So that's one thing from a podcasting point of view. Also work with anyone who's in the market to where we can help develop a show for them as well. So that's the other thing with podcasts. And with video, honestly, YouTube's a grind. There's no escaping that grind of YouTube. So just doubling down on that grind. We spend the better part of the past 4 or 6 months, I would say, trying to understand YouTube, purposely within a silo here. I don't like using that term, but what we did was just did a lot of hit and try in terms of video formats, lengths, type of content, what's working organically, what's not. And now that we have a better sense of that, to just double down and increase output.
Makes sense. So you're talking about vernacular content, right? So there's been a wave of vernacular content push from all the biggest streaming services in India, right? We see Hotstar, we see Amazon Prime, we see Netflix. Even Netflix is following into that, right? So how relevant do you think that is in terms of podcasting, right? I mean, because once again, going back to the same topic, like for a video-based format, it makes sense that you have vernacular content. But at the same time, someone who, for example, is not able to speak that language can at least look at the subtitles and just be able to see the content, right? A lot of South Indian regional films are actually becoming quite successful in North India and whatnot. But when it comes to an audio format, do you see that working? Do you see such kind of trends transforming over here as well?
Yeah, 100%. I see them working much better than OTT platforms, and I'll tell you why. So just look at the cost it takes to make a show versus the cost a Netflix show and versus the cost to make a podcast. It's just so different vastly, and like we spoke earlier in the episode, the dissemination of information is so different that obviously like two same shows don't translate equally well to a video show as well as a podcast. They have to have their own tweaks to sort of fit into that medium. But because time and effort required to make a podcast is so much less than making an entire TV series, for example, it allows for a lot more volume. So, for example, if we're talking about fantasy, right, a Bahubali or like that. So, a Bahubali TV show or a fantasy TV show versus 10 fantasy podcasts in 10 different languages within India, it's a no-brainer. So that's the thing with the States right now. If you have an interest area like business or entrepreneurship or sports, within basketball, for example, there are 20 great podcasts that I can listen to. Right. And that's only because the interest area, cost of starting a podcast, having the right knowledge to sustain that podcast, and then finding your listeners is so easy because there are so many listeners out there. So I definitely see it translating to podcasts in India, vernacular podcasts. And because of that, if you're a guy who's from Andhra Pradesh, you don't speak Tamil, but there are 10 Tamil podcasts, eventually there'll be 10 Telugu podcasts within that vertical as well. So I definitely see that happening.
Right. That sounds amazing and inspiring even, right?
Yeah.
Let's just make more content, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Vikram, for joining us today.
Most
and
welcome.
Thank you so much for all the effort you guys are putting towards boosting the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem and the Indian podcast ecosystem as well. And thank you so much for like just giving us your valuable insights, because this is exactly the kind of content I wish to push out from the Indianaut Podcast. Thank you.
I'm glad. And congratulations again on the show, man. Onwards.
Thank you so much. The Indianaut Podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Music. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook to receive all updates on the upcoming episodes. We'll see you in the next one.